I don't know why I'm feeling nervous today. I always get a little bit funky at these things, but okay. We are live. So now
Don't be
anything you
nervous. We
say is
love
being
you.
recorded and will be available publicly. So just keep that in mind. This is going to go up on my YouTube channel, um, hopefully later this evening, so that those who couldn't be on Discord get to hear it because we're going to do different questions here than we do on Facebook. So, what if this is your first time, and I think for some of you it is, um, welcome and thanks for coming. I feel like I'm seeing new names today, which is exciting. The way this works here on Discord, you can talk. You don't have to. When you come into the chat, it automatically has you muted. So if you want to say something to me, you'll have to go into, you'll have to swipe right on your phone so that you can see or have the voice channel room list up there so that you can see yourself, and you'll have to unmute yourself in order to speak. But what we're going to do, the way I did this last time, is I collected the questions ahead of time because otherwise it can go a little long. We're going to be here for an hour. You can come and go. You don't have to say, you don't have to tell me if you're going to leave. You don't have to tell me if you're coming back. You are welcome or welcome to not be here, whatever works for you. If I answer a question here in Discord, because we can actually chat, if I answer a question on the list and you want more information or you have a follow up question, please feel free to just jump in. Because I'm trying to get through a lot of material, I'll just keep talking. I don't mind at all if you interrupt me. But do keep in mind sometimes when I'm talking, the sound for me is only myself. So sometimes I might not hear you. You might have to like, Amy, Amy, a couple of times before I'll realize that you're talking. Please feel free to do that. I don't mind. I love hearing from you guys and I love hearing comments or what you think or like or don't like or whatever. So please, this can be an open discussion. We didn't do it a lot last time because we were getting through so much with the Beast books. We got a little bit, I think we got a little bit more time this time. It's hard to say. Um, but I just want you all to know that you are very welcome to interrupt me or to talk or to laugh or whatever. And if you need to unmute yourself, feel free. The only thing I will tell you is if there's background noise, if you're unmuted and there's background noise in your area and it's coming through for other people, I will mute you. And unfortunately, sometimes when I do that, I forget that I did it and I forget to go back and check and see if you're quiet. If you need to get in touch with me or a mod, you can see just above the voice channel, it says there's text chat goodbye. It's actually text chat goodbye alpha, but it cuts it off. You can go in there and you can say, can somebody unmute me? And mods, if you see that and you know how to do it, please feel free. Otherwise, just yell at me and say, Amy, such and such needs to be unmuted. But we just do that because this is a recording and because sometimes the background noise can be really disruptive. If there's a lot of noise coming through, I will mute you or somebody will. So please don't take it personally if it happens. Please do feel free to interrupt me. And thanks for coming. What I'm going to do for those of you who've just come in, which is quite a few, hi, Chelly. I'm going to add you all to a room before we leave today. You're all going to get added to a private chat room that is called Secret Squirrel. So I have Chelly. Um, is it Latasha or Latacia? Because I'm never. I always want to say people's names right, and I usually don't. Anyway, and Cindy, I think I got everybody else before. You guys will be added at the end. Later this evening, about 4 hours from now, I'm going to post the epilogue to Dark Alpha and also some extra content that nobody knows about. They're going to be in the room here on Discord. They're also going to be in a super secret room in Facebook. If you get added to both, it's going to be the same content. As long as you're added to one, you're good. So if you're at both lives, don't freak out if you got added to the Discord room and you didn't get added to Facebook, or either or. You're going to be fine. It's the same content. But you're all I'm asking you to do, if you want to discuss that content, please discuss it in the room where I've provided the material. Don't discuss it in the wider chat rooms, because the people that haven't come to the lives won't get this content for another couple days, and they'll have to get it on Web Novel. So if for any reason you're here, oh, Queen's here, Queen Tessa, and I haven't mentioned that I have you on my list, or you don't see the secret room come up, please feel free to DM me. Great. Cool. So that's what we're doing. Oh, and that's your entry for the giveaways as well, because that's just a really easy way to have all the names in one space, and then I'll just draw from those things. So I'll be announcing the winners of the giveaways either later tonight or tomorrow. And they are all either journals, books. I'll show you when we're on Facebook. If you see Facebook, you'll see. If you're only on Discord, take a look in the announcements. There's a picture of a few of the things. We got some fun stuff, so I'm excited. So let's do this. This is your only disclaimer. If you are here and you have not finished Dark Alpha, Rise of the Dark Alpha, you're going to get some major spoilers today, like as big as they come. So that's your call. I'm just letting you know, this is the only disclaimer I'm going to make. If you're listening to this later, if you're here now and you have not finished the book, you're going to have the ending spoiled for you if you stay here. So my advice is to go away and come back later when you're finished. But hopefully everybody who's here has been through this before. So I have so many questions, and I'm really sorry. This time I forgot to write down who asked me what. So if I ask your question, oh, and I also got a lot of repeat questions, so it was kind of hard to do. So I may have rephrased your question because I may have got it 6 different ways. We're going to start with stuff that's kind of about the wider world and the writing. And I'm excited to tell you guys, this is stuff that I've been holding back for a long time. So the first thing, or one of the first things that I got asked, was how I came up with Thana and how I chose the animals that got chosen for the tribes, the clans, excuse me. And this is a really fun and weird thing that I'm finally excited to tell you guys. What actually happened last year, about this time of year, back in May, was when, if you've read Beast, was when I had decided that I was going to redeem a certain character, a villainous character, and had intended to give that character their own book. And had in fact started planning that, and had even written just a chapter or two. And in order for that, because that book was going to bridge between King and Queen. So if you haven't read those two, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil them for you. But what had happened was, sort of May, June last year, I had started planning this, and I thought in September I would begin to write it for real. Early in September, I did the world building for it. I went in and I decided, so they're going to go into this other place. What kind of world is it going to be? What kind of animals am I going to have there? I decided it was an alpine, like a cold climate world. So I needed alpine animals, so I was doing some research on that. Then the werewolf competition got launched out of the blue in September, and I thought, great, this is still going to work. I'm going to do this book. It's going to work for the werewolf competition. Isn't this awesome? But when I took the synopsis that I had, I didn't give anybody any of the written content, but I gave them a cover, a synopsis, a little bit of notes about the story. And these were fans of Beast. These were people that were in that world and loved it. The response was not as exciting as I hoped. And I think why is because King was in full noise. Queen, though, was starting to drop off. People were still sort of really enthralled in King of Beasts. And because Queen was already out there, most people were thinking, well, once I finish King, I've got to go read Queen. So the idea of a third book in that series just wasn't really lighting the fire. It wasn't that they didn't want to read it, they still wanted to read it, but it just wasn't like exciting to them. And I thought, oh no. And then I talked to my editor about the competition, and she was like, I really think you want to do something different here. I really think you want to do something, unattached to the series. And so I ended up taking the world that I had built for these other characters to discover and bringing it its own story. And which was a lot of fun, but what it meant was that I changed stuff quite a bit because at that point in the planning, I was just separating it completely from the Beast series. So the animals and the clans that you see in the Alpine setting, all of that was in place, but some things were different. There were some characters I created then that I didn't end up using. There were some that I changed. But that kind of the world building I used, but then it shifted a little bit as I developed this new character and these new conflicts that I was going to use for it because the original plan for that world was very fantasy focused. And this one, as you know, was going more into the modern world and the connections there. So even though I kind of constructed that with Anima in mind, it ended up changing somewhat in the story. So the real answer to the question is that I already had those animals and that world kind of created, but I wanted to give it something a different twist, and that was how we ended up because we wanted to go with something a little bit more modern, current day. That was how we ended up with Zev and Sasha. And some of you, I think, were here in the privilege group back when all of that was happening. You didn't know it at the time, but I came to you and I said, hey, which of these names sounds like a really good male lead, romantic hero name? And I gave you a list of names. Zev was actually originally named Waylon, which just didn't work at
Oh,
all. And I can't remember why. It was something to do with the meaning of the name or something. But when I wrote it, Zev was named Waylon and Sasha was something else. I can't remember what she was. Anyway, I gave you guys a list, a few of you that were there, gave you a list of some character names, and Zev and Sasha were the names that you guys chose. So if you weren't here before, or if you haven't been here for those kinds of conversations, just know if you're in any of my groups that are more sort of smaller, any of the secret rooms, sometimes I'll come in and I'll be like, hey guys, what do you think about this? And I use that. Like when I bring stuff to you guys and I ask your opinions, like I legitimately use that. It's really helpful for me because inevitably you think different things than I think you're going to. And so it's really helpful for me to get kind of fresh eyes and new minds and stuff, get your impressions of things. So that was how Thana began. It began as an extension, sort of Anima. Well, not an extension, but it was going to be like a crossover. And then it became its own thing. Um, and I think it was Melissa. I can't remember. I think it was Melissa. Somebody asked me, why does the sun rise in the west and set in the east in Thana? The honest answer to that is just because I wanted it to be obviously not on Earth. I think, I'm not 100%. I think I might have done the same thing in Anima. I don't remember. But yeah, that question came up, and I didn't want to answer it in the comments of the book because I didn't want to spoil certain things that were coming up for people. But really, what that was about was just making it identifiably a different place or a different dimension, if you want to call it that. Um, why is it that only the chimera can talk that the only chimera that can talk telepathically are the wolves? And how is it possible that after forming a mate bond, they can also speak in their mate's mind? So I don't know why. There is a sort of typical lore amongst the werewolf lichen thing. There's often a part of that world, and for a lot of authors, that includes the telepathic thing, where they can speak to each other in their minds. Um, and what I'd established in early on in Alpha was that only the wolves can do it. And it was mainly because if you have everybody in the world can all speak telepathically, it solves too many problems. So there was an element of needing there to be the ability for people not to get information. So I did two limitations on them. A, it was only wolves that could do it, that could form those mind links. And B, they could only usually form them over a certain sort of distance. They couldn't just like cross worlds or, be thousands of miles away and still do it. So I gave them some limitations. What happened that I didn't realize, and somebody actually pointed it out to me, originally I had intended, or I had written in, and you see it in the foxhole early on when they're hiding Sasha from the team and they hide in the foxhole. Um, Zev actually talks with Duncan in his head. And I had forgotten, however many chapters, weeks, months down the line, I'd forgotten that I'd established that the wolves can do this with anybody they're very close to. Like they can create this if they have a certain level of trust, if they have a certain level of intimacy with anyone, they can form this mind link. Um, but it's words only. So it's not images and feelings and things like that. It's words only. But I forgot that I'd established that. And so when I finally had Sasha and Zev together and mated, it was natural for that link, obviously, to exist between them. But there's apparently a line in there somewhere where I say, or where he says, or where it basically is established for the reader that they can only do this um, with. I don't know if I used the word mate, but that was kind of what was implied. And one of the readers went, "Hey, did you forget?" And I was like, "Oh no." But so from there on, what it is it's something that the wolves can do with anybody that they have a great deal of trust with. Because for a wolf to form a telepathic link, that person also has to be able to, or they open themselves up to a certain degree. And they do have a good amount of control over what goes and what doesn't. But you'll also see, like, there's a time when Zev was really, I think it was either Zev or Lars, I think it was Zev, was really agitated, and everything he was thinking was going out to all the wolves that were kind of in range, and Lars kind of is in his head going, "Dude, you got to shut up," and he realizes that he's kind of lost control. So I tried to establish that there was, limits to it and stuff like that. But basically, I just think it's a cool, fun thing for characters to be able to do. And it adds intimacy as well, especially between mated pairs. And I missed that in anime. I wished that I'd had that more than just between the wolves. So in this world, I decided we're going to let them do it with others. What's the difference? Okay, so this came up a lot. A lot of people asked about the ancients because Nick mentioned them in the story to Sasha, and Yet is an ancient. Everybody kept coming up, what about the ancients? What about the ancients? And then I also had some questions that were asking about the difference between, because I had said in some of the comments in Web Novel um, that the ancients that are in that Nick's mentioning, they're not Yetis, they're not Bigfoots, they're something else. What an ancient actually is an original or created form of chimera. So it's not a scientific research experiment. They call them ancients because the first chimera, quote unquote, that was discovered by this set of scientists was Yet. He was a Bigfoot, and he was discovered in the human world and accidentally led the team to Thana, which created basically the death of his species. And so whenever this particular group of scientists comes across any creature that doesn't, to their knowledge, exist, or that appears to have this sort of combined DNA, they call them an ancient. So it's one that basically that existed before they started doing their stuff and messing and interfering. That's how the scientists see it. That's how the team sees it. They call anything that they didn't make an ancient. And in part, that's because when the first ones were discovered, which was Yet and the Yetis, it was about he had a they had a very the city of Thana was originally built by and for Yet's species. Everything is big because they are so much bigger. So the rooms are massive. The ceilings are really high. The pillars are wide. Like it's all made out of stone. Everything's big and spacious, and it's because the species that made it is much larger than the human chimera. So the ancients that Nick mentioned were species and or creatures that they had not made themselves, but that they had come in contact with in different worlds and brought in for testing or research. Um, and none of them were in good shape. I honestly don't remember the exact quote of what Nick was saying to Sasha. What I remember is when I wrote the line, Nick was doing the thing that he does, where he tells the truth but doesn't give you the whole picture because he knows what you'll hear when he says it. And he knew when he mentioned ancients that Sasha, just like you, was going to immediately jump to Yet and the Bigfoot species. And he didn't want her to know that it wasn't them because he knew she had a connection with that. So he was kind of using that in that reference, or at least getting her engaged that way. But the original plan to introduce those characters so that you could see what they were ended up kind of getting discarded on the editing floor because we were running out of time. So I'm sorry because everybody was like, "What about the ancient?" Everyone thought we were gonna have the ancients either show up or have to be saved. They were not. They were never, even in the original plan. They were never healthy, or there wasn't a lot of them, and they weren't ever going to be a major part of the solution to all of this. But so Yet is an ancient, supernaturally created. Chimera are human hybrids made by scientists in the human world. And even because there was somebody that asked me why is Yet essentially always in animal form, because he's considered a chimera in the book. He's like the creatures. And somebody was like, how does this work? Like, why do we have some that shift and some that don't? And basically, what it comes down to is that ancients like Yet, and some of the creatures that the scientists make, the ones that they call creatures, it's because something went, well, from the team's perspective, something went wrong, right? Their goal was always, they were always aiming for the chimera that can shift, that can be either the human or the animal form. But often when they created these things, something went wrong in the genetics or in their process of growing. They don't know. That's the whole point. It's all experimentation. So they're always aiming for a Zev, but sometimes they got other stuff, especially when they were experimenting with species of animals that they hadn't used before and it was still a new process. So most of the creatures, well, all of the creatures are considered mistakes. They're all considered to be experiments that went wrong, which is why they're not used by the scientists, why most of them are allowed to just be let go in Thana, because they don't really know what to do with them. They're creepy. They can't be in the human world because they'll immediately be identified as something strange. So if they're not going to kill them, or if they're not using them directly for experimentation, and they don't use them most of the time because their genetics are different, so they end up just releasing them into Thana, which is why Nick was so terrified when he came into Thana, why he had always refused to come in up to that point, because the creatures hate the team. Absolutely despise them. All of them. They're not treated well. They're not cared for well. None of them can reproduce. They're like mules. That was the I guess the creative foundation for them. Mules are half horse, half donkey. You can create a mule by having a horse and a donkey mate, but mules can't reproduce with each other. So the creatures, unlike the chimera, the creatures are always essentially one of a kind or isolated. They never have mates. They never have like a clan or a tribe because they're always kind of a screw up from the scientific perspective. So they just kind of get tossed and they don't get well treated. They don't, basically, they only get grown until they know for sure they're not going to use them. And then they're either killed or put in Thana. And so they are sentenced, they have a life sentence of isolation. They all know that and they hate it. Because they can see, this is again why they sort of stay separate to the other clans. They see Zev and Lars and all of these guys and how they can have a life. They can find mates. They can make families. None of the creatures get that, and they hate it. And so there's a fierce sense of vengeance in the creatures, and the scientists know it, which is why they usually get rid of them when they're very young, so that they don't cause problems. Because obviously some of them are really big and some of them are very strong. So basically, yet being ancient, that's just what he is. That's just his form. He doesn't shift because he is just what he is. The creatures don't shift because genetically they can't. They are just what they are, but they were scientifically made. The chimera can shift because they are the intention behind all of this scientific experimentation is to have this species that can do both. So that's why you see a difference. Um, okay, I just want to check before I move on to the next one if there's anybody here that's not on my list for the thing. Did anybody have any questions so far or comments? I'm looking in the text chat. That gif is hilarious of the spider. I love, you guys, that Ernie became so popular because I was really nervous when I first made him. Like, I thought he was cool, like scary because I hate spiders. He was intended to be scary, but
Oh, he was.
I didn't have the sense of like I don't want to read about this character. That wasn't how it felt for me. But I remember the very first chapter where he showed up, everybody was like, "What are you doing?" Like, everybody was like, "Get rid of, why did you do this to us?" Um, and I was like, "Oh no," because I knew that he wasn't like immediately going away. I thought, "Oh no, are they going to start being like, I don't want to read about a spider?" I just love that he became, not too long later, everybody's like, "Where's Ernie? Bring back Ernie. We need more Ernie." I love that too because I'm terrified of spiders. I hate them. So that was exciting for me to see everybody kind of take that journey. But we're going to talk more about Ernie later because I have some specific questions about him. Okay, somebody asked me who's your favorite character to write? And I'm assuming by that question you mean like while I'm in the process, being in their head. And the truth is, for this book, it's a toss up between Zev and Lars. On the one hand, I mean, Zev's my guy. He's my favorite. The whole book revolves around him. It's pretty crucial for him to be a favorite. But I really love him because he has such a soft heart. But he's strong with it, and I love that combination. I mean, you guys know if you've read more than one of my books, that tends to be how my guys are. But I love him because he's extremely giving with his love. Like he always has been, because I can see him even as a child. And some of it's a response to not having a family and the insecurity and stuff that he had as a child. So he expressed his affection and his appreciation for others a lot because he was seeking that, right? So I kind of, the psychology of it. But he is really that way. As a character, as a male, he's very demonstrative, even when it's not a romantic thing, and loves to be close to people that he cares about. So I love being in his head because I know that aspect of him, and I know his protectiveness and all of that. And I love him a lot. But he does have some really screwed up thoughts and feelings about himself and things that are very dark in his head, either because of things that were done to him or ways that he's dealt with the pain and the loss in his own life. Lars, on the other hand, started out intending, he was originally created to be the role that Nick ended up playing. So initially, when I first wrote Lars, and I just mean in the first probably 2 or 3 chapters, maybe 5 chapters that Lars appears in as an author, I had him at that point still pegged as being somebody who was going to be very ambiguous. You weren't going to know. He was kind of going to be the hidden good guy. Like he was going to do a lot of things that he shouldn't do. And he was going to play an antagonist or a villainous role. But I knew he had a good heart. He was just messed up. But pretty early on, I realized that I needed him to be more of a brother, and I needed that conflict between him and Zev to be resolved a lot more quickly because it originally was something that I wasn't going to resolve till the end of the book. Um, so it got to be a lot of fun writing Lars because I was kind of discovering him as I went, and that's not how I normally go with my characters. Normally, I know where I'm taking them right from the beginning, and so Lars was kind of this, well, what are we going to do with you? Because I wanted Zeb to have his brother. That was what it came down to. I wanted Zeb to have his brother. And I wanted them to have a brotherly relationship. And I was excited when you guys got excited when that started to develop between them, especially when I think it was when Zev was planning on getting Nick, um, you know, pushed aside so that he could get to the device, and him and Lars were like plotting how they were going to do it. Um, I love those moments. And I love even the moment where Lars is just, just connected with Kjell, and and Zev steps in the way, completely unaware of what's happened, and there's like an aggression between them. Even that moment I love because Zev comes to understand very quickly what's going on and is able to sort of soothe things a little bit, even though it's dangerous there for a while. I don't know. I've always loved watching brothers together. I never had brothers. I always wished I had brothers growing up. And I've always loved a true sibling relationship between men when they have that closeness and they have that similarity and they get each other's sense of humor. I don't know why, but I just get a real kick out of it. And I wanted Lars to be that for Zev. So we switched it up. So he was a lot of fun to write because I was never quite sure, at least for the first, I don't know, 150 chapters, didn't really know what I was doing with him. Um, so it was just fun to see how that was all going to play out. Um, but Lars is, Queen says she loves Lars. I love Lars too. Um, oh, Mary, I have 3 brothers. Take your pick. I have a wonderful sister, and I didn't want to not have my sister. I just always wished I had older brothers as well. Um, I'm or I'm planning to write a series about Alpha Brothers, where there's several of them, and that's fun for me. That dynamic where it's adult males who've known each other since they were kids. Because they grew up together. I mean, as brothers. Anyway, I don't want
I'm
to get
looking forward to
sidetracked.
that one.
Me too. I hope the time comes sooner than I think it's going to. Um, so yeah, so my favorite to write is Zev and Lars. Um, and then, then I have the spider question. So how did you make me like a spider person? That's a quote. How did you make me like a spider person? That was an accident. When I first created Ernie, he was supposed to be scary. I knew he was a good guy. Like, I knew he wasn't a villain. He was supposed to look like a villain but not act like one. But he was going to be um, aggressive or frightening in the sense that he was always going to play a role that was somewhat protective and intended to modify the behavior of the humans. Um, but what I had fun with that one. So if those of you who don't know, Ernie is named after my father. The reason he's named after my father was because I had come up with this idea that whenever their experiments went wrong as they saw it, and a creature was created, and they found the creatures really frightening because they look awful. A lot of them look like monsters. And so one of the ways that the human team would try to kind of keep their own fear and stuff in check was they would always give them cute or silly names. Like the idea was that they could, mentally, it's difficult or it's less, it's not easy to, be afraid of somebody called Ernie. On top of that, my dad is a really, really sweet, tender guy, and super friendly and outgoing. So when I had this spider guy that I was going to create, and he was going to be the only one, and I was like, so the scientists are going to be terrified of this thing, right? Because this is like the worst thing yet, as far as half of them are concerned. I was like, what's like the silliest name? Well, not silliest, but what's the least frightening name that I could give him? And immediately my father jumped into my head. Um, and I was like, I'm going to call him Ernie. And what was funny about that, I didn't tell my dad right away because my dad's birthday was coming up. And so I waited for his birthday and I said, I want you to know I named a character after you. And he's like, oh. And then I told him what it was. He thought it was hilarious. My mother was not as impressed. Really? You named a spider after your dad? Um, but I just thought it was really funny because if you know my dad, like when I told my husband that I named the scary spider Ernie, he's like, "Really?" Like, yeah. So that was the point, right? At least for me, give him a name that's completely not intimidating. So how did I make you like him? Well, I'm really glad that I managed it because when I first created him, I imagined that he was going to be a character people were going to be uncomfortable to be around, but I was going to make him a good guy. So he looks like a villain on the outside, but he thinks like a hero. But everybody had so much fun seeing Nick so scared of him. And I didn't see it coming. The whole thing with Nick pissing his pants the first time, which by the way was not a full on, like everyone thinks he is like a full on. No, it wasn't a full on thing. He is a little bit, peed a little bit, but they can smell it on him. So they're calling him pissy pants. Everyone thought that was hilarious. And I think that that was what broke the ice with Ernie was that people loved seeing him used to basically humble the villain, right? So I think that was the dynamic that got everybody to like him. But then also because he's got that kind of dry sense of humor and he understands the effects that he has on people. And because I'm in his head, I know it actually hurts him that he can't be around human beings without them essentially recoiling from him because he knows he's not going to hurt them. Um, but he hates the team. He absolutely despises the scientists. So he is more than happy to play on, that whole dynamic to upset them. Um, so I think I honestly think that that's just what drew everybody to him was that he was doing something that everybody wished they could do. We all wanted to see these people, you know, humbled or scared or whatever. And I just think that that's why people ended up liking him a lot. Um, but yeah, I don't like spiders either. So that one was a little bit uncomfortable for me as well. Anyway, Ernie was supposed to be one and done. He was supposed to be a creature that came in, sort of managed Nick for that process of getting him back out of Thana, and then maybe cropped up once or twice later. But everybody enjoyed him so much, and the personal sort of vendetta dynamic that happened between him and Nick was so useful that I just ended up keeping him around. So that was again something else that happened that I didn't sort of anticipate in the writing. A lot of people asked me what happened to Ernie after the book was over. Did he go to the safe place? Did he stay in Thana? Like, what did he do? Um, and I had to kind of imagine that because so to my mind, Ernie hadn't left Thana. He was still there. Um, but I did imagine that in that whole time that you see at the end of the book, those months when there's so many humans in Thana and they're all hunting or trying to find creatures, Ernie's the stealth character, right? Like he's the guy that doesn't need a weapon, doesn't need a like he can he can take people out without any kind of fanfare about it because of the webs and stuff. So,
Yeah.
to my imagining, Ernie took his vengeance, so to speak. He was very careful about it, and he was very selective. But he was taking people out that whole time that all of those team were in Thinnet, and they were spread out all over the world trying to, um, you know, find where the Chimera had gone. Ernie was like here and there just picking one of them off. And they would be done very quietly and with no fanfare. And so they would just disappear and the team wouldn't know what had happened to them. Same as the guy that Zeb took out. But then I imagined that eventually he got bored. Like once all of the humans left, once they accepted that there was no more Chimera there, there's no reason for them to be there then. The second gateway is closed. The Chimera are all gone. Once they realize that the Chimera have been taken from the sanctuary and away from both Thana and the human world, like there's no point. They know that Thana's there. They can get to it if they need to, but there's no point for them to be there. So when that happens, Ernie gets bored because he's alone, pretty much, right? Because the creatures, they're all loners. And the friends that he did have are all gone. So I imagine that eventually he went back to the human world, initially hunting Nick. So he's going, well, if I'm going to be bored, why not go out in a ball of flames kind of thing? He's going to go and try and take Nick out. But when he gets to the sanctuary, Nick's not there. Um, and so he became this creature that had secretly returned, so to speak, but he's doing it to mess with them. And so he stays hidden. He doesn't confront them. He never lets them know that it's him. But again, here and there, he just picks one of them off now and again. And his resolve is because at that point, all of the Chimera are gone. His resolve is that if they start making new ones or they start bringing others in, that he's going to help them get out because he can do stuff with his webs and pulling people up trees and stuff like that. So his intention was to help if the team started making Chimera again or brought new ones in. But yeah, I just imagine that he became like the ghost of the sanctuary where they don't know what's there. All they know is that every now and again somebody leaves or dies and they don't know how because he's up there hiding and being the spider that's. I kind of get a kick out of that. So that's how I imagine Ernie lives out his life, basically terrorizing the team. Um, and some of the scientists would quit their jobs because of him, because they were terrified of this thing because they don't know what it is. Um, were there any males in the sanctuary that needed saving? So one of the reasons that I didn't really address that in the book was because I knew it would be hard to hear. There were a few. There were not many. Most of the males, the way the whole process worked with the Chimera, when the females were taken, so this is 3 years earlier ish, 3-ish years earlier. Zev is removed from Thana and brought into the team. And there are other males that he dealt with and trained with and stuff. He was not the only one who was turned into an assassin. But the ones that they did that with, those guys were always intended to kind of live human lives. And they did that with Zeb for 3 years. He didn't live at the sanctuary. He had to go back and forth. He was taken there for breeding and for different things. But that's not where he lived. He lived in the world. And so there are, to my mind, a whole passel of males who were seen as appropriate for this kind of role and continue to be used by these powerful people. They're not good men, most of them, or they've been turned into not good men. So they are your spooks, your CIA covert agent types. They're not CIA, but it's that type of character, that type of role, where they are off the grid and multiple identities, and they are used as assassins and different. They just do different things in secret. So those guys don't need saving because they're all doing their thing and doing it willingly. Um, the when the females were taken, and I don't know if you guys remember, but there's a story. I can't remember if Zev tells Sasha or yet. One of them tells her about when a female or two were taken back to Thana because they were very unhealthy, and ended up dying. And they believed that the scientists had taken them back in an attempt to see if they could get them healthy again, get them better, or kind of instigate something with the males. So, what ended up happening as a result of that whole thing of taking the females out was that the scientists figured out that basically if you could keep the males focused on the females in terms of either trying to get them back or trying to earn them back, they stayed engaged and they stayed relatively healthy. And so most of the males that they had in the sanctuary and in the labs, most of the males were actually taken back to Thana over the course of time, the ones that were alive. Because unfortunately, it's a reality of experimentation that a lot of things die in that process. So as they were losing more and more chimera, now the scientists are scrambling, how do we keep everybody healthy? So they learn that if we keep the males free, quote unquote, free in Thana, and use the females as their motivation. You do this, you work with us, you do this because that's how you're going to get them back. It kept them sort of fit and relatively healthy. The females were harder. They needed to control them because they wanted them for reproduction. They wanted them for experimentation. So they couldn't just let them go be free and mate with whoever they wanted. They had to control that process, which is why the females had to be taken, in the scientists' mind, the females had to be taken to the labs. Um, but of course, that meant that just like any truly wild animal, when they are suddenly closed in and not seeing the sun and not being free and not having choices, and not living naturally, they lose they lose a lot of themselves, which is why some of the females are really messed up psychologically. Um, and so, to my mind, there were very few males that were still in the labs. There was here and there were some, because there was a few that they used for breeding, in attempts to create, genetically. And there were here and there young ones that had been made that hadn't been released in Thana yet. Because generally they took them to Thana somewhere between sort of 7 and 12, depending on the species and what they wanted to do with them. Somewhere in that window, they took them to Thana. Anyway, that was what happened to Zev and Lars. So no, there wasn't very many, but there were some. They were unhealthy, and they were not. Most of them were not in their right minds. The reason they were kept was either they had something genetically about them that the scientists were trying to use their genetics to reproduce, or they were so messed up that the scientists knew if they released them that they would cause more problems than they would solve. So they just kept them essentially caged. But most of them were killed. That's the reality. Most of the males that couldn't either be used or released in Thana were just killed. But they were harvested. That's what Zeb talks about when the females come through and he finds out that some of them are marked for harvesting. They use their body parts and their internal organs and different things to try and help, quote unquote, help humans medically. So the males were the ones that they did that with. Any male that wasn't ill, and where their body wouldn't be negatively affected and they couldn't be used for the experiments, would be harvested. So there really weren't any of them there, a bare handful. The rest are either free in Thana or free in the, well, not free, but being used in the human world. Um, what happened to the females who didn't make it through the gateway with Sasha? There was 5 or 6 of them, and they were all taken to places of safety. All of them were entered the gateway afraid, and even though they'd been given instruction on how to focus and what to do, they were actually afraid to reach Thana. They were afraid of what was going to happen to them in Thana, or whether they were going to reach it at all. So they weren't focused the way they should have been. It wasn't planned. I just always imagined that if you had a group that big that were all going through the gateway at the same time, unless they were super focused and super coached, well coached, you were always going to lose some because, like you saw at different times with Sasha and Zev going through, all it takes is for their mind to sort of wander, and the gateway will pick up on it and give them a new route. You can imagine that for somebody who's in something of a panic or maybe not the healthiest in their mind, that can happen on and on. They can keep getting redirected. Um, but the way that I see it, what it was that those females were so afraid or so messed up that they couldn't get their minds off the yearning they had to be somewhere where they wouldn't be hurt or they wouldn't be in danger. And so the gateway took them individually to whatever place kind of fit their mold for that. So it's happy endings for them, but there was no way I couldn't communicate that in the book because nobody knew. Like there was no way for anybody else to know where they had landed or what had happened to them. The reason Patty was different was because she was coached by Nick. Nick messed with her before she went in, which is why she ended up sort of misfocused or misdirected. He wasn't intentionally trying to get her killed or hurt. He was just trying to not get her to Thana because he knew it was going to be a lot more complicated for him if there was the accountability of having somebody else there. It just so happened that because she was so focused on the scientific medical side of it, that was kind of a part of the picture that she had in her head of what she was there to do and where she was going. So the gateway took her to a place where she became effectively the victim of her own current situation, which was a humbling and, as you saw, a very traumatic experience for her. So, yeah, she's suck it, Patty. I actually have a heart for Patty only because I think a lot of people get um, get how would you say get drawn into things, and when everyone around you is doing something or involved in something and they all see it as some kind of positive, they all spin it that way. I think people's minds can get really molded by that. Um, and for her, she was so analytical and so logical in her way of viewing the world. It had never really occurred to her the effect that she was having on these creatures. It was more just she always had the goal. And Nick's a little bit that way as well. This is what we're aiming for. We just focus on that. We don't really think about what it's doing. The goal is good, so we're aiming for the goal. So to me, to my mind, Patty was never a villain. She was ignorant, or there was just something about her that wasn't right. But as soon as she understood, she turned. Like that was what you see her do with Sasha when she does show up in Thana, because you'll find it. The thing that I thought was interesting about that, she's had this terribly traumatic experience. She's understood and learned what it is to be the victim of the experimentation, right? Her instinct in that moment when she does get free is not to go back to the human world, it's to go to Thana, where she can now warn them about what's been going on. She can sort of make amends as much as she's able to. To me, that demonstrates a lot about where she comes from, or where her heart really lies. So I don't hate Patty. I hate that people can be manipulated that way. Um, and don't get me wrong, she's not a hero by any stretch, but I don't think she's a villain. She's the kind of person that, under different circumstances, would not have been doing what she was doing. And so once she learned, she changed. Um, so the last question I'll answer is, where did Patty go after she told Sasha about her baby? So initially she was held by the Chimera because Sasha still wanted to be able to talk to her if she needed to. So they were just holding her, much the same as they did with Nick. But when they realized that they were all leaving, she was escorted back to the gateway, and it was left up to her where she would go. She was not viewed as a threat in the sense that it was pretty obvious to everybody that she was completely messed up. Nobody liked her, nobody wanted to be around her, they were happy to get rid of her. But they also knew she wasn't, she's not a Nathan. So they basically let her be free, but they made sure that she left. Like the whole idea was you don't get to be here, right? You can go do what you want, but you don't get to be here. Um, I imagine that she did go back to the human world, but completely avoided any of the people or things that she'd had anything to do with before. Um, and and my fun little twist for her was that as a result of her experiences, she became an activist against big pharma. But I don't even know. I just was like, what would that do to a person? Like if they really did an about turn on this stuff, where would they end up going? So, well, she'd end up being, a PETA activist or wanting to stop scientific experimentation on animals and wanting to stop the lobbying of big pharma in government, all this sort of thing. So that's what I imagined she became, but realistically, she probably just hunkered down because there were very powerful people who knew who she was and knew what she knew, and she would not want any of them to know where she was or what she was doing because she would be seen as a threat to them. If she's no longer on the team, they don't want her out there telling people what they're doing. So, I imagine she really just hid. We are going to have to head over to Facebook. Before we go, did anybody have any questions here for
I have
me?
one.
What's that?
What happened to the females that were already mated to Zev?
Okay. I will answer that one for you over on Facebook because that
Okay.
one is in my list, I believe.
Okay.
But it's just going to be a little bit of a lengthy answer. Did anybody have anything about this stuff that I'd already talked about? Because I do have a bunch more questions that I'm going to answer over on Facebook. If you aren't on Facebook and you want to be, uh, the link is up in the announcements, the event announcement room. You can come over and be in the group, or on my YouTube channel. So you can do Linktree, which is linktr.ee / author Amy. That has a link to my YouTube channel, and or you can search author Amy on YouTube. And later on this evening or tomorrow, the recording from the Facebook Live will go up on there. So if you can't join us at Facebook, you'll still be able to see the answer to all the rest of the questions. But I'm running a little bit late, so I need to run. So I have all of your names. I'm just doing a last minute check to make sure I've got everybody. And the information, the extra content will be posted in the Secret Squirrel Room later this evening. And that's also your entry for the giveaways. So if you are here in Discord and in Facebook, you get two entries because there will be different draws for each live. So if you do both, you get entered twice. And I believe I've got everybody. I will see you all over on Facebook in about 5 minutes. Bye bye.
Cool. Hey.
Okay. Yes, we're live. Awesome. I am going to